On the 31st of October 2000, the United Nations Security Council unanimously passed Resolution 1325, formally recognizing the Women, Peace and Security agenda, the impact of conflict on women, and the significant role women play in conflict prevention, resolution, and post-conflict reconstruction. Since then, 9 further Security Council resolutions have been adopted, addressing women's active and effective participation and the prevention of conflict-related sexual violence. The Women, Peace and Security agenda, popularly abbreviated as WPS, is underlined by 4 pillars: participation, protection, prevention, relief, and recovery. Today, 32 African countries have adopted national action plans to implement WPS. Welcome to Season 5 of the She Stands for Peace podcast, a series by the United Nations Office to the African Union, supported by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In this episode, I'm joined by Carole Baudoin, Security Sector Reform Chief at the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in the Central African Republic, otherwise known as MINUSCA. And we discuss security sector reform and the WPS agenda. So, Carole, the United Nations Security Council resolution on women, peace and security identifies security sector reform, also known as SSR, as a tool for implementation. However, one question that keeps coming up over and over again is what role the security sector plays or can play in implementing the women, peace and security agenda. So how would you describe the role of the security sector, especially in the context of your experiences in the Central African Republic?
First, I will say that the perception of the security, the meaning of security, is really at the heart of the political life everywhere in Africa, unfortunately, or specifically, and definitely in Central Africa. Before to talk about security sector, because again, and especially in Central Africa, when talking about security immediately, because it's something very deep, I would say from the top to the population, everybody is thinking about national defense forces, army, military, which is one of the problems that we have. And for us is to explain that security is so huge, and also to explain that approaching security is not only because or with the security apparatus. Unfortunately, in the different crises that Central Africa, in fact, passed through, especially these last years, I would say the security apparatus was definitely part of the grassroots of the conflict. So it's mean that security sector, yes, very important. First, because it's definitely a problem. Then also because it should be part of the solution. So ignoring and I would say in a context, you will see that in any peace agreement, the security is still, one of the challenge for the negotiation. So is not all, and is what we need also to explain. But security sector, and as long we don't have, I would say, the good governance of the security sector, starting with the forces to the different services, we don't have peace. We don't have stability.
You actually set up the SSR section in MINUSCA's operation in the Central African Republic when you joined in 2020, and also launched the national SSR process in support to the CAR government in developing all the strategic and normative security frameworks. So I have 2 questions about this. First, what can we learn from your experiences in setting up SSR sections and processes, especially when you reflect on gaps you've witnessed in the Central African Republic and other contexts?
In fact, I've been in South Africa since December 2013. So almost 10 years, more or less almost at the same position, knowing that I set up in 2014 the SSR services. Then I was deputy and back to my position. I had the advantage to spend 10 years here. And I will say that it was and is still very challenging. And we have different kind of challenge, internal challenge. First, because it means that thinking about what you will provide to the national, it has to be not a SSR response, but a mission response. And for that, you need to have a common understanding within the mission. And it's true that unfortunately, thinking about SSR, and you know that it was the first generation, there is still too much, and it's very deep, that SSR means train and equip, which is not. And this is the same thing with a national. So it means that part of the challenge is to explain that is a process, and it has to be a deep institutional reform, not only this kind of very ad hoc, kind of cosmetic, providing train and equip. And this is very, very deep. And it means that mentality need to change, accepting that you can train and equip all the troops of the world. If there is no institution, if there is no management, no governance, no command and control, it won't work. If there is no accountability. So this is part of the challenge. And I would say this first challenge is a mid-long-term process. You cannot have immediate result. You need to accept to have this time to explain, to educate, to change. And I would say for the peace mission, this is very challenging because usually our mandate, is immediate result. For us, it will take age to do that. And we need also to accept, and part of the challenge, never forget that one of the challenge of the SSR, it has to be a national ownership process. So it means that you have many actors to deal with, to explain, to educate, to proceed. And this is definitely, what I learned here. And I was very lucky, again, spending 10 years to see, but it was also very challenging because you need to convince, you need to advocate every day, sitting, explaining internally with the national partner, with the international partner. So it's something that I would say the other thing that is part of the paradox that we need to deal with. You know that in terms of security, we have a lot of principles to engage. And one of the principles is, I would say, national ownership. Now, after this principle, you have all this accountability process. And part of the issue also that we need to face that national ownership, national choice, and maybe not compatible with some principle, including the human rights principle. And for us, the challenge is, okay, this is not standard, as far we can support. And this is, we have the mandate, we need to accompany, we need to support. The point is, could we accept, what is decided if it's absolutely not fitting with any, I would say, principle, especially in terms of human rights?
And so my second question regarding supporting national SSR processes and governments to develop strategic and normative security frameworks. So what has been your experience and key challenges in integrating the women, peace and security agenda perspectives into security sector policies, frameworks and practices in African countries?
I would say the first challenge, and before to talk, about, women, first it was to explain the necessity to develop this master plan. Tendency is to have, this kind of work plan. It was a process to explain, no, you need policy. You need to have a strategy. It has to be legal framework. And again, explaining this process. So this is the first challenge before to talk. Second challenge was, again, to change the approach on security. Unfortunately, still is very deep that security is a monopoly of the uniform people. And it doesn't have to be a military strategy. It has to be a national defense strategy. And this is also part of the process. Talking immediately about women who, any is not working. First, again, are we agree what it means security? Are we agree what means, this legal framework? Are we agree what means this national and not military? Again, you need to be pedagogue, to coach, to mentor, and to explain. Honestly, in Central Africa, and this is part of the paradox, never forget that Central Africa was the first country in Africa having a woman president, head of state, Catherine Samba-Panza, to have a president of the Constitutional Court. So I would say that the point to not have women, in key position is not really an issue. We have an army with women, 30%. So the problem is not also to have women, is the condition of the woman. And I would also recognize that since here, the UN, EU, African Union, NGO promote, this woman inclusion. So the Central African are really familiar. There is no resistance to include, any gender component and to have, no, this is in the plan, but in the implementation is totally different. So this is also one of the paradox. So accepting, and there is a lot of national plan. Central Africa is really involved on this women peace and security agenda. Again, is the implementation. And I would say, to be also honest, the implementation of any policy master plan is not only on security and it's not only women. Again, all this process is a long term. Now, I will say also, and is in terms of implementation, that, as I told you, security, and especially security or political, is considered as a male domain. So it means that you can have very nice offer in the plan. Then when promoting is not discrimination, is just because it's clear that the women are not representing any political risk. So you see the difference. Is not the reject, is just to say, okay, we need to deal first with male, we will see with the women after. And especially the mission is working to support the national authorities to have the local election. And we are really also trying to work a lot to have, definitely more women. But again, it's a political also understanding. If it's not a danger, we don't consider them. Having said that, we have, again, a wonderful framework.
Reflecting on your years of experience, how do you think SSR can be effectively designed and implemented to ensure inclusivity, accountability, and sustainability, particularly in fragile and conflict-affected settings?
Security is still considered as a monopoly. So it means no transparency, confidential defense. So it's all what we need to change, and it's becoming worse in conflict context setting. And it's something where we need to work, and we need to talk less in terms of SSR reform, and definitely to talk more on governance. What means governance? What means accountability? What means transparency? And I would say it's definitely the most challenging. And it's for this reason that when talking security, we try, and not only here, just to open the concept of the security. It's kind of bottleneck, is very reductive, is not effective. And, providing social services, providing employment, providing health, providing food, this is security. And this is where definitely we need to insist. Development response is definitely more effective than any SSR process. So it is all what we need. And I will say the conflict-affected setting, what is coming is worst is the community conflict. In any context we have in Africa, in the same thing in Central Africa, we have all this social, cultural, tribal aspect that we need to see this. So we need to keep this kind of laicity. And I would say it for us in Central Africa, since 5 years, especially 20, as you mentioned, I manage with the support of my hierarchy to focus on governance, accountability, control. Actually, our best champion is the General Inspectorate of the Army. Yesterday, we had high-level meeting with the head of state. And again, it was for her the opportunity to advocate, to focus on oversight mechanism, working with the National Assembly, focus on control. And this is where we can expect to have, a kind of ensuring, I'm not so sure, but at least promoting. Ensuring is very difficult for us, but at least what we need to continue to promote is this inclusivity, accountability, sustainability.
Okay. So in your responses, you've kind of highlighted the fact that the kind of security environment is predominantly occupied by men, and also the importance of good governance, right? So reflecting on your experiences in MINUSCA and other initiatives you've been engaged with, what strategies do you think can be adopted to ensure a sustainable and effective participation of women in peacekeeping and security governance in Africa?
I was not exactly a woman in peacekeeping. So it means women personnel, because this is also the point. And I will say that, unfortunately, first, in terms of peacekeeping, I believe that we don't have enough female representative in uniform, definitely. Maybe more on the police component, more women. And in police, it's very difficult to have military female personnel, and definitely ready to talk with a member state, with a TCC, to provide more women. Also because I will say part of the work of the peacekeeper is to be close to the population. And I would say that definitely women are more sensitive to be close to the population. But I will say that in terms of peacekeeping also, and if I consider my case, I would say that we have the security military uniform component, we have the civilian that we are. And I would say it's very difficult also for civilian women, UN staff, to be considered in the sector. I believe that for the UN, for the peace mission, actually I'm the only female SSR chief. And it was not easy at all. It was a huge struggle to convince, because also I heard so many times that, much better to have a male and former uniform. I'm purely civilian. I'm a lawyer. So I would say that we definitely need to progress and to give the best example. Really, it's something, a discussion, and we had chance also to discuss with HQ as something should be done. Now, in terms of security governance, again, we're talking about governance. And I would say that it doesn't mean that this governance should be within the security apparatus, but it's very important to have, for example, the women parliamentarian involved. It's something very important. I believe that we are not creative enough to identify which kind of female profile could be more involved. The approach is still a bit classic, but definitely I would say the peace building, you were talking of the peace building, and it's true that how many women are really involved in any peace negotiation. And this is, I would say, not only in Africa, but in any negotiation team, quarter, going to negotiate any peace agreement. How many women do you have from the institution? So it means that from what we are in terms of accompagnateur, I think we should give the example. And I believe that between security, but also the peace building world, it's still maybe led by men. And I'm not so sure that we are providing the good example.
Oh, you mentioned earlier on about the kind of local communities, right? So what role do local communities and women's organizations play in shaping effective SSR strategies, especially in conflict affected regions?
Part of the SSR strategy, I would say this is maybe the dream, is again to ensure security, not only because with a very strong security apparatus, but to use all the different mechanisms in the society. In addition, and the SSR need to complement other plan, development, social. It cannot be disconnected. It has to be, an ensemble. It has to be, coherent. I believe that in terms of security, probably the SSR process are definitely maybe too much focused on the institution and not enough on what we call the community security approach. It means working with the community, working with the women, working with the association, involved with. Again, this is, I would say, we need to change the approach of the security. Human security is key. And if we adopt this approach of human security, we will have definitely more women involved. And security doesn't mean, and I'm clear that security is not the monopoly of the uniformed people. And again, is what we are trying in Central Africa. We are still supporting a political process. And it's clear that part of the MINUSCA strategy, because we have very interesting political strategy, is definitely first decentralization, not working only with the institution, working at local level. We have a mechanism called CMOP, which are, I would say, with the local authorities, with the prefect, with the mayor, with the governor, and indeed with the civil society. And it's definitely all the niche. So I would say useful where women have definitely their place. And I can say that this is not only, the SSR, because it's true that our work and mandate is essentially focused on the institution because it's where to. But our colleagues from the civil affairs, political affairs are working with all this network involving women. And is definitely key. And they are doing a wonderful job. So not thinking only on institution, but working again with population is I would say, the process to educate also the population.
Finally, looking ahead, especially as we approach 25 years of UNSCR 1325, what future priorities should be focused on to enhance the impact of the WPS agenda within SSR frameworks in Africa?
We need to normalize the situation of the women. Years ago, I was with UNICEF. UNICEF were the first agency conceptualizing the human rights-based approach on everything, not to have something specific and to work on the environment. Working on women, no. We need to work on the environment. I believe that we have the tendency to have some segment, and is only on SSR. SSR is just a component. And as I said, and it was exactly my point, is not women, peace and security and something apart. It has to be, it has to be globally. And I would say the security will pass first with the access, equity on everything. This is really the security. Is really the security. It's not something different. We still need to have this discussion with the member state. We still need to have the discussion within the different institutions. But I would say that we need to avoid to give the perception that woman is a kind of exception, is a normality. To have something different, for women, different plan. Please, I believe, I start to be a bit senior, so end of my career. And I would say maybe tendency to do something about, no, it has to be including on everything. And first, the international organization need to show the example, what we are not doing so far.
I've just got an extra question to ask you that is not related to the interview, but it's for another episode, if you don't mind. So the question is, what are your reflections on how we should reimagine women's participation and inclusion, especially in peace negotiations and agreements, and when we consider the barriers and challenges that women face in participating in peace agreement negotiations? And of course, you can offer a perspective from an SSR kind of dimension.
And we said that it should be a conditionality in any peace negotiation. We should have women part of the team, no exception. We know that there is, and especially in some region, some cultural barrier, but it has to be a conditionality. We are, I would say, accepting a lot of things, and not, it has to be, if we don't want to use the conditionality term, it has to be a prerequisite to engage. From both, from the negotiator, we accept too many things. We accept too many things, including as international community. So we need to review with any country. Again, it's true that the majority, I'm very interested that today we have a former Minister of Foreign Affairs, woman, Central African, who joined the armed group. She has very long, history. And it's pretty interesting because we have 3 women in the armed group. Maybe, you see is part of. But again, we should review the format of the negotiation to normalization, not exception.
That's it for this episode of She Stands for Peace. Until next time, stand for peace with Africa's Women, Peace and Security Agenda.